beautiful sky.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is finally out in the UK and I've seen it, and this is my review. There will be spoilers in this, so if you haven't seen the movie, click off and then come back. So let's start off with the main focus of the story, Rocket Raccoon. As much as this is Rocket's story, he's pretty much out of the picture for like 80% of the movie. We do see him in flashback scenes, but it's still kind of annoying it being Rocket's story and then him not being there for the majority of the movie. Looking back at the other movies, we see why Rocket is so reluctant to join the team and make friends and do what he does. It's because of the trauma he faced through the High Evolutionary in this movie. Speaking of the High Evolutionary, he is honestly a menacing villain. The satisfaction I felt when he was killed, unbelievable. Like seeing Rocket getting tortured so much as a baby, and then him torturing all these other animals and all these children that he has captured, and then finally seeing Rocket get the satisfaction of just shooting him was honestly one of the best feelings in the movie. The High Evolutionary's face, like actual face, was honestly the creepiest thing in any Marvel movie to date. Honestly, it was more creepier than the zombie scene in Multiverse of Madness, mainly because it was unexpected. With the zombie scene in Multiverse of Madness, we sort of had time to prepare as it was in the trailers. Quill is also another main focus of the movie, and throughout the movie, final decision that he makes at the end of the movie makes sense because it's being hinted at throughout the movie. We hear at the start Mantis being like, oh, you have family still on Earth and you've just left them and you're here in space with us. And he's reluctant to go, but then as soon as he reaches counter Earth, it hits him that like he misses Earth despite being on Earth in Endgame, which was quite confusing. He could have just gone and seen his grandfather then. Yeah, so at the end we see that he goes and lives with his grandfather. But it does say Star-Lord will return, meaning he will most likely return in Avengers Kang Dynasty. And as for the rest of the Guardians, they're pretty much more or less the same character. Like Drax is the lovable idiot that he is in the other two movies. Mantis is a lot smarter in this movie than she was in Guardians 2, because in Guardians 2 she was much more naive in what she did. However, in this, she pretty much tells the Guardians, do this, do that, do this, do that. So she's essentially putting the strings behind the scenes. Like she's the one that stops them from killing the obelisk at the end and becomes friends with them and then goes off on her own mission with them. Honestly, Nebula's character arc is one of the most fascinating character arcs in the whole of the MCU. How she went from detesting Gamora and Guardians and just being bad for like 2 movies, and then now deciding to change nowhere into this home for these kids that they've rescued from the High Evolutionary. It's a completely different character arc to how we see it before. Gamora's story arc is essentially just the case of what would have happened if Gamora didn't meet Peter Quill in Guardians 1, and she essentially joins the Ravengers and becomes the leader of it. But obviously, if she had done that in 2014, Peter Quill would have been there, but that's besides the point. Now, as for closing off all the character arcs, it works in a way that it's not a necessity for them to show up in Kang Dynasty, but if the actors and screenwriters and Marvel are willing to bring them back, then they can. For example, Mantis going off on a journey of self-discovery, she could easily be brought back in. Same with Gamora, the Ravagers could just show up. However, the Ravagers are pretty much irrelevant now in terms of the Guardians story because Quill is no longer part of the Guardians. However, Quill can return because, I mean, it does say at the end, Star-Lord will return. And for the Guardians that's formed at the end of the movie, there's Rocket, Alpha Groot, Adam Warlock, Kraglin, and there's this kid who I don't really know the name of. Alpha Groot is honestly Groot that we had in Guardians 1, but just more wham. Like, he's so cool. And I'm assuming this isn't the final form of Groot as well, because Groot is forever evolving. Speaking of Adam Warlock as well, Adam Warlock is essentially a big baby throughout the movie. And it's actually funny that it works. Unlike MODOK in Ant-Man, where they took a big character from the comics and made him into cringy comic relief for the movie, Adam Warlock as a baby works and makes sense because we see him being developed at the end of Guardians 2, and him not being fully developed makes sense. To describe him, he's essentially Vision in Age of Ultron and Civil War, had Vision been bad, but then Adam Warlock turning good also makes sense. you know, having second chances is what the Guardians is all about. And Groot giving that second chance to Adam, perfect. Now for the ending, it's actually a beautiful ending for the trilogy, like perfect ending for the Guardians, and it's pretty much what James Gunn has been hinting from the beginning. Because James Gunn had full creative control over the story, he could form and manipulate the character arcs to how he wanted it to end, and he ended it in the most beautiful way possible. And it wasn't like characters dying or anything, it was just a wholesome, happy ending where the Guardians split up, but the possibility of them returning is also in the horizon. Now the post-credit scene, nothing that major necessarily. The first post-credit scene is essentially the new formed Guardians going out, being the Guardians of the Galaxy, and playing to the song from the first Guardians movie at the start. So it's a nice sort of full circle moment, how the first one started off with this song and this one ends with that song. And then the final post-credit scene is pretty much Peter living with his granddad, having a normal life, talking about mowing the lawn, and then it just says Star-Lord will return. He's not like teasing Kang, nothing. It's very simple, grounded story, and it works. This is what Ant-Man and Thor should have been, but it wasn't. My one complaint about this movie is its length. It's 2.5 hours long, and pretty much the last hour is just in the same space, and I feel like they could have really cut down on the two fights. So there's the fight where they try to retrieve the access codes to Rocket's heart bomb thing that he has, and we see Star-Lord and Groot escape, and then Nebula, Drax and Mantis return to the base of the High Evolutionary to save Quill and Groot, only to realize that there's all these kids being kidnapped. It could have been much more simpler than them escaping and then returning, but then it does allow Rocket to return in the story, so there's that. Now how much would I rate this out of 10? I would say this is a solid 9 out of 10, which is, it's been a while since a Marvel movie has been that high ranked, because the past few have been quite disappointing. The only exceptions were really Multiverse of Madness and Wakanda Forever. So it's good to see Marvel getting back on its feet, and hopefully Captain Marvel 2 isn't a complete disappointment. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. There's a video here explaining the time travel logic of the MCU, and a playlist here of all my other movie reviews so far.